So dairy, what is dairy? Well, dairy comes from milk, and milk is what the adult animal gives the baby animal to fatten them up and make them grow. Okay, so that's where we're coming from. That's the first thing. The milk is about 87% water, and it's about 8%, 8.25% solids. And they are proteins and carbohydrates, vitamins and minerals. And the reason I'm mentioning that, there's not many things in nature that have protein and carbohydrates like that. So that's something just to be aware of. And when we talk about, obviously there's like 0 to 5% fat, depending on what we're looking at, where the milk is coming from. The fat has fat soluble vitamins in, so vitamin A and vitamin D. So milk, there's the start. Now, milk has lactose in it. So there are some people that are lactose intolerant. And I've got a double whammy from what we were just talking about. I didn't know I was lactose intolerant, and I used to drink coffee, and I never felt quite right. And then I stopped the milk and realized that I was lactose intolerant because it was better. You've also got two types of proteins, A1 and A2, casein proteins. Most grass-fed, well-reared cows and goats tend to have A2 protein, and most other ruminants, or most other cows actually, are A1, and that can be something that people can't tolerate, A1 or A2 protein. So it's not just lactose, it can also be the proteins. So that's a pretty interesting thing. So goat cheese, for instance, a lot of people claim that they tolerate that really well, and that might be because simply, forget the lactose, it's the A2 protein that's there. So you can look at all the different types of dairy. So you could look at, say, something like ghee, okay, which is pretty much all fat. It may contain a small amount of lactose. That's very unusual. It's clarified. It's a pure milk fat, and a lot of people are okay with that. And it's probably slightly more tolerated than butter. And butter is pretty much all pure milk fat as well. And these two things are really good to cook with because they have high smoke points, and they're very stable, and they have butyrate in them. They have short chain fatty acids. So these are really good sources of essential fatty acids. And that's dairy. So we're talking about ghee and butter. We're going to get to cheese in a minute, but I'm trying to do like a logical thing where most people talk about it. Then you get bodybuilders talking about whey protein isolate. Not whey protein concentrate, which is really bad, by the way, but whey protein isolate, which is sort of a byproduct of cheese making and all these things. And that's dairy as well. And some people who can't get enough protein, they try the whey protein isolate in like a shake or something like that, because they feel that they can't eat enough. So that's another type of dairy. And then there's Greek yogurt, which, remember, everything is a derivative of milk. And what they do is they add cultures like lactobacillus, which is just a bacteria that drives down the acidity. They can also use things like vinegar and lime juice, stuff like that. And that makes the calcium and the phosphorus in the milk really easier to digest. So which is why some people tolerate the Greek yogurt. Hopefully, the person that asked the question is thinking, wow, yeah, you said you wanted to go deep into it, so we're going deep into everything. Okay, you can get a thing called Bulgarian yogurt, which has more cultures than Greek yogurt. So people that don't tolerate Greek yogurt could try Bulgarian yogurt, and that just means that there's more cultures in there, and it's making the calcium even more soluble and the phosphorus more soluble. And this is also very similar to sour cream. So we're going to get into some more basics now. So when you talk about different things like cream, the Americans call it heavy cream, but in England we call it double cream. That still has some traditional milk solids. So when people put heavy cream into their coffee, there is a slight sweet taste because you've got some of the milk solids there. And that's 36 to 50% milk fat. So it's mainly fat, but obviously not as fat as butter, which is why some people put butter in the coffee because they can't tolerate the heavy cream. And that's why some people who can't tolerate heavy cream can't tolerate butter. They put the ghee in because there's even more fat. So it's all about really tolerating A1 or A2 proteins, tolerating lactose, and also tolerating the amount of fat. So that's good. There's a few people out there really push things like cottage cheese. That's, again, something with acid used. It creates curds of the casein protein. But you see, it could be straight back to A1 proteins there. Some people try half and half. That's half milk, half cream. So you've got the lactose problem. All right. So that's a little sort of whistle stop. But I just want to go into a little bit more detail, because this is what was asked. So there's a thing called the glycemic index. It's not perfect. There's a lot of variability to the glycemic index, but it's a measurement of how quickly your blood sugar rises after eating food, basically. So most things in the glycemic index, I can remember a couple off the top of my head, which is white bread and brown bread. The score was something like 88 and 87. There's not much difference between breads, between white and brown bread. But then when you look at the GI index of butter, it's 0. All right. So butter does not have an effect on your blood glucose. If it does, it's so small, it's deemed as a 0 reading. Okay. And heavy cream is very near to 0, whereas whole milk, there's a huge jump. It's up to 27, and skim milk is 34, and low fat yogurt's about 33. But high is normally about 60. So all of those things that I just mentioned, all those dairy products, some people might think, well, I don't know why I'm struggling with the dairy, because if they're reading the GI index, they will think, well, these are all low scores. But hopefully I've just covered, because there's other things going on, like the lactose, the casein, A1, A2, all those sort of things. Then a little bit more detail. I'm nearly at the end of it, Raymond. Okay, and we'll move on to the next question. You can also look at these foods and look at the insulin response. All right. So this is something I'm trying to teach people as well. You could think your blood glucose is fine, but you're still struggling, or you've got inflammation, or you're feeling tired. And you could say, well, hang on a minute. I'm having whole milk. It's a GI index of 27. Why is that? Why is it still a problem? So when you look at insulin, and I'll give you all the figures, butter has a score of 2. So look at butter, the steak and butter girl, why it worked for her. It's 2. Heavy cream is 4. Half and half is 18. Whole milk is 24. And skim milk has a huge response of 60. And low fat yogurt is 84. So those things have a huge, huge impact on insulin, right? So we could then look at the amount of sugar that's in it, because some people think that it's just the sugar. How much sugar's in butter? It's a winner again. There's no sugar in butter. Heavy cream, there's about 2.8%, half and half, about 4%, whole milk's about 5%, skim milk's about 5%, and low-fat yogurt is 18%. So those people that are coming from the low-fat community, you probably noticed, wow, low-fat yogurt, which is, I fell for this, so this is why it bothers me, because I bought into this. Huge response to insulin, huge response, in the blood glucose, and also there is tons of sugar in it, because they've taken the fat out and they've replaced it with sugar. So the fat content is really important. And again, butter's got 80%, heavy cream's 37%, half and half's 12%, whole milk 3%, skim milk is 0.1%. And low-fat yogurt has 1%. So it's rubbish, basically, low-fat yogurt. So but that's why we don't tend to say that that's a good source of dairy at all. And we tend to say heavy cream's okay and butter seems to be better, and ghee is even better than that. I'm not going to get into calories because they're irrelevant. We've just talked about all the things there that are actually going to make a difference in your body. If people want all the figures about the calories, we can do that as well. So a lot of the milk is heated, to pasteurize it, and then the fat is separated. And that's basically, what skim milk is. It's just the white liquid at the end of having all the goodness taken away. So that's pretty rubbish, really. And a lot of the good products have a fermentation process. So we're going to coming into cheese now. So you can have a cream that then has fermentation added to it. So things like creme fraiche, I don't know if you have that in the States, that sort of makes it a 30 to 40% fat it's like yogurt, creme fraiche. And then we have mascarpone, which has a big fermentation process on it, and that has a 70% fat content. In fact, most people call that mascarpone cheese, even though it's a cream. And then what else can you do with cream? You can churn it. All right. So I've actually made butter accidentally when I put some cream in my jacket to have in some coffee, because I was going to a cafe I knew didn't do cream. And I started jogging because I wanted to get there on time. And I ended up with butter in a bottle. Right. Oh. So what actually happens is it releases the liquid. So churning is a really simple thing. You can make butter basically by churning cream, just turning. That releases all the liquid. So that gets rid of more of the milk, the solids and the lactose and all that sort of stuff. And you end up with butter. And by the way, the liquid from that bottle is what's known as buttermilk. There you go. So you've made butter, you've got some liquid left over, you have buttermilk. Cheese also has a fermentation process. And that's basically where the bacteria is eating up all the milk sugar and also attacking like the proteins. So some cheese is really good for people that have that lactose intolerance, and some people can not cope with dairy, but they're okay with butter and are okay with some cheeses. And that's because the bacteria has eaten all the things that are bad for you. And we're going to get into the weight loss stools in a second. So the more aged cheese, there's even less sugar in it. So things like cheddar, really good. There's no sugar in it. Pepper jack, I think it's called, that has 0. Mozzarella has a little bit, 1.4 grams on average, compared to processed cheese, which has 19 grams of sugar in it. So the processed cheese, like the cheese that you see in like on the top of a Big Mac, which is more like plastic, that's like 5 or 6 teaspoons of sugar in it, which is ridiculous. And then you've got kefir, which is sort of like a yogurty milk type drink. And that's had all the lactose taken out, and goat's milk kefir is pretty good. Now, that's the whole of dairy there, hopefully encapsulated. So you understand there's a big process, and basically you just keep doing different things to it, and you get rid of the lactose, you get rid of the liquid, you get rid of the casein proteins. The more you get rid of, and you end up with more and more fats. So then what is cheese? It's like a lump of fat that tastes really nice. That's basically it. So why does some dairy give you a problem? And I know that the questioner asked about amino acids, and we'll talk about that in a second. But I want to talk firstly about the weight. So for some people, all of those things, like there's a slight insulin response, there's a slight blood glucose response, they can be just enough to give you a little bit of weight loss stool, because it tends to be the volume, because there might be, I'm having a teaspoon of heavy cream, but I'm having 6 cups of coffee. So you start really adding all this up, and that can be a problem. The other thing is the odd chain fatty acids in a lot of the dairies, which never gets any coverage on the internet, and I don't really understand why, because it's a known process. So when the fats are chopped up, the body does it so it has 2 carbons, and when you have an odd chain fatty acid, which is really unusual and it's in dairy, you end up with like 3 little carbons, and the body absolutely loves making blood glucose out of that. It goes to the liver. It's a really good substrate. It's about the only thing it can do with it, but it's clever. So it goes to the liver and it makes blood glucose. So some people, that would be the mechanism, because we're trying to keep our blood glucose low, we're trying to keep our insulin low, and here we are eating something that has odd chain fatty acids in, and it can cause a little bit of a problem. So that's the main reason. When you get to things like cheese, it is possible to overeat on fat, and you have an overplus of energy. And if your body has more fat than it needs, you can see a little bit of weight gain. And cheese is one of the few fats it's really easy to eat a lot of. I think most people that like cheese think, yeah, I can have a ton of brie, I can have a ton of cheddar, so you can not really get the signals, the satiation signals saying you need to stop. If you look on the internet, there is a lot of rubbish talking about the lack of fiber in cheese is the reason why you gain weight. That is such a load of, I'm not going to swear, but you know what I'm trying to say. there are amino chains in all casein proteins. And then we're going to go on to the next question because I think I've covered it. So this is the really geeky thing. If you want to know, there's 209 amino acid chains in casein proteins. And the 67th one, I don't know why it's the 67th one. If that's slightly different, that dictates everything. And that can make that cheese or that dairy product or that thing really bad for you or really good for you. You could thrive on it. So that's one of the things where we talk about trial and error. So we might say, someone say, oh, I really love cheese, but I eat a lot of brie and it seems to be really bad for me. You'd say, well, you've got to try different cheese, because there doesn't seem to be an index that says what the amino acid chains are. So we couldn't say, oh, there's a group. So that's why we have to do the trial and error. So that's the dairy question. I hope I nailed it. I hope everyone's happy with that. And as a thank you for staying right to the end, here is a bonus: raw milk versus conventional. Some of my clients really get benefit from trying raw milk. That's because 100% of the following stays intact, whereas with the conventional milk, you have a vitamin A, C, and E reduction. You have an iron reduction of 66%, a zinc reduction of 70%. B-complex vitamins are reduced by 38% and calcium is reduced by 21%. The worst thing about it all is the enzymes are 100% destroyed and the whey protein is denatured. So thanks for staying to the end. Make sure that you do subscribe. And if you have any comments, I'd love to hear them. And make sure you hit the like button. It really helps the channel. Thank you for staying.